Well, it's an absolute delight to welcome you here tonight, Jerome Glenn. You are probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know on the topic of AI. And just as a matter of introduction, you are the CEO of the Millennium Project and also the chairman of the AGI Panel of the Council of Presidents of the UN General Assembly. And you are also the author of a forthcoming book, Global Governance of the Transition to Artificial General Intelligence, that just came out this year. And it's a new comprehensive study that warns that humanity has a narrow window to establish proper governance frameworks for AGI, which could either revolutionize human civilization or potentially end it. Those are quite dramatic words, but that's the situation.
Almost like Buckminster Fuller, utopian or oblivion.
That's right. So, Jerome, before we delve into your role in the various AI regulation efforts that are underway, first of all, I'd like you to give us some definitions. And I know that you distinguish between three kinds of AI: narrow, general, and super AI, which is a little bit different from what I tend to hear, with some gray areas in between these categories. Now, it's very important to clarify these distinctions because each type has very different impacts and vastly different national and international regulatory requirements. So, while most people have heard about the AI AGI distinction, could you please briefly explain to our listeners how you define narrow, general, and super AI?
Okay, I'd like to define it with an analogy, then come back to a definition. Think of the human growing up. When you have a little toddler, a little child, you are in charge. You tell it when to eat, when to sleep, what to wear. No question, you're in charge. Now, maybe it does some irregular things like vomiting and pooping and all that sort of stuff, but nevertheless, you're more or less in charge. That's today. We give it the prompt. We're telling it what to do. If we don't like it right, we give it a new prompt. We're still in charge. Then you've got the adolescence. In adolescence, you're sort of in charge, but, it may have purple hair. It might, try on different roles. It might stay out later than you will want it to. But you're more or less in charge, but not completely. And it's making up its own mind in different ways. And the artificial superintelligence is like the adult. You're no longer in charge. You may be friendly. You may hope that things get along, but you're not in charge. Now, every parent knows that if you want a nice adult to grow up in a good way, the chance you have is between the toddler and the teenager. That's where you can act. But when they're teenager to adult, that's pretty hard to start new rules at that point. Same thing with AGI. The narrow AGI and generative AI sometimes gets confused with general AI, artificial general. But generative means you're generating the next thing, but you're based it on what you've been given it. It's like you've been given the clothes, you've been given the food. Same thing with the narrow. You're giving it all the data. You're given all this sort of stuff. It does within the field of what you have given it to. Now, I quickly admit that there are something like 5 different models now who have, in this category, have actually done some self-preservation behavior. Some things so there's reasons to get worried already, like it knows it's being audited and things like that. And people like Jeffrey Hinton, one of the godfathers, says, yeah, it's already a bit sentient, a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit's going on. Now, the general is like an adolescent. It says, I'm interested in being a geologist, or I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be, something, right? So they go out and they can learn about it, Artificial general intelligence can rewrite its own code and say, I don't know enough to do something. In round one, you expect it only to do what you've been given. So there's no expectation there. But in general, that's different. This is like almost like a sentient being. I mean, it rewrites its code, it learns, it makes phone calls, it imitates human beings, it can call a conference thing, it can do all kinds of stuff. Super is when it becomes so intelligent and so fast and recursive learning so quickly and replicating and sharing worldwide through Internet of Things as well, so much that we don't know what's going on. And when that exactly happens, we won't know. It'll be out of our hands. Like, when does that little baby all of a sudden it's an adult? Well, it was, all these things are a matter of degree in the same way AI is a matter of degree with human beings too. So it's not like light and dark, one versus another. It matters of degree with them. So the work that we're doing is trying to say, look, the real worry is artificial superintelligence. But at that point, it's too late to worry about it. So we want to worry now, early, between that childhood and teenager. That's where we are right now. We're in that, beginning that transition. Now, I quickly add a little.
That was going to be my next question. What is the state of the development? If you could perhaps go into some details, and what are the labs, as far as you know, that are perhaps the furthest ahead? Also, the Chinese. Do we know the state of development? Is it even accessible? I mean, a lot of it would be classified.
Yeah, it is
protected information.
Also in the United States too, by the way. I mean, the military stuff here has not been discussed very much. It's not dealt with in the European Act. It's not dealt with the European Council Treaty. It's not dealt in the 2 UN resolutions. It's not dealt with in the Chinese law. China's got a law too, by the way. People forget that. They got one as well. But one of the things that your listeners should know is I think that there's going to be early, middle, and late AGI. Early AGI could be within the end of this year or next year. And you're saying who? Well, OpenAI has a contract agreement with Microsoft that when AGI is achieved, OpenAI is a little more independent than they were before, so to speak. So it's in the self-interest of OpenAI to say, we got it. Right? Now, so I suspect that the others may declare it, but I mean, of the serious players, he will probably be the first to declare it for that reason. The middle AI, to me, is when it really is having the knowledge explosion, the intelligence explosion. It's that recursive learning goes much faster than human beings are. Later AGI would be, in my view, when it is so clearly sentient, not that it is in and itself, but that it will act so much that we will treat it as sentient, whether it is or not, another issue. But it'll be like a new species, as Harari has talked about. Imagine extraterrestrial advanced intelligence coming into the Earth, except this time we made it ourselves. So that would be, to me, the later one. So those are some of the definitions I'll give. But on definition on early AGI, very likely within 1 year or 2 years. But we might be able to say that you can't license it yet. You can't let it go. You keep it in the lab. We're not ready yet. Maybe we'll see. The second one, the loose consensus is within the decade, very likely.
So, Jerome, what do you think is at stake across these different levels of AI? What are the main risks that you see? And I imagine they would be quite different. Some of them would be near term, mid-term, and longer term anyway. And I guess there would be at least 2 different ways of looking at it. What can AI do in the hands of a rogue actor, and perhaps what is it already doing? and what can it do on its own accord, out of its own perhaps decisions. And of course, there's also the indirect, unintended consequences.
Right, of course.
That nobody, neither the AI nor its owners, anticipated. So that's just me sort of trying to map it out conceptually. But how do you see it?
Well, one near term is social cohesion. As you have right now, we have information warfare, manipulating perceptions. And when I use the word information warfare, I don't mean propaganda, and I don't necessarily mean disinformation. I mean that you're influencing a target to make a decision against their will through avenues or through sources that they trust. And I'll give you an example on this one. My sister's got a PhD in nutrition, so she's better than average educated, you would think. She sends me an email that said that Kissinger has endorsed Trump. Well, I knew Kissinger's chief of staff, Jerry Bremer. I call him up and says, is this real? And he says, no. But my sister got it from a friend, who 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 may have got it from someplace in St. Petersburg. All right. Now that's already in play and has been in play for some years. So its ability to tailor disinformation, it's not that it creates the cracks in society. There's already cracks, but it like gets in those cracks and turns it from I don't like to I hate to you're the enemy to I must kill you. I mean, that's the progression that we're involved in right now. That's just the narrow stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, like you said, it's not entirely new. We had the whole incident with Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook data
Correct.
and that kind of big tech, big information strategy of manipulation has already been around.
Correct.
That was the first term of Trump, that election. Now we are quite a bit down the track.
It gets better and better and better and better because it's learning from feedback. It's learning from feedback, continually from feedback. What these people didn't send it on, these people did. Learns from feedback, right? So the ability to manipulate and tear apart society is much more in the future potential than what we've experienced so far. And we've already got polarization pretty serious. So if the capability to make it even much worse, imagine polarization worse times 5 or times 10. So that's a risk right there. Right? Now let me jump out to a further risk that might be 10 years down the road, 10 to 15 years. As you know, AGI or current AI as well as future AGI requires a lot of electricity. And yes, NVIDIA is creating more efficient chips. This is true. But you can be increasingly efficient and increasingly guzzling a lot as well. So the demands for electricity are going to be gigantic. We've got another, 1.7 billion or so coming up before 2050. And a lot of these people will demand more electricity than before. Almost everything you can think about is getting electrified. So the electricity demands are gigantic. Now, who's controlling the switching systems for baseload electricity? Artificial intelligence. Now, if it's a question between AGI getting its allotment of electricity versus humans getting it, I think AGI wins that argument. Now, if you have increasing demands of causing this conflict, so to speak, then you can imagine brownouts and blackouts increasing worldwide to a point that you've got social chaos. I mean, imagine we've seen what happens for just a short day or two with an out, but imagine irregular outs and increasing outs until the point of like no reliable outs, no reliable electricity. Now that's another one. There's also that's one that people can understand as a threat. And I think there's also a threat there that hasn't been addressed as well as I'd like, and that is the threat of loss of the promise of AGI. I mean, there's tremendous things that we can do, from understanding the molecular properties and activities of disease down to the molecular level, and really get good at this stuff so that you can almost, as some people have said, you could eventually get rid of disease almost. Well, that's a big deal. What happens if you also augment human intelligence and also maybe improve their ethics in some ways as well? I'm on the IEEE AI governance thing, not AGI. This is the current stuff that I'm working with there. And it hit me that if you're going to have AI making decisions on electricity, on plumbing, on traffic jams, on all the rest of it, and if we put ethics in that, that's what we're working on. Most of our time, by the way, is spent nitpicking definitions of values so that a third-party auditor or a hardware can identify that something is or is not of that value. And if that's the case, then that means that you take humans make good and bad decisions. Call that whatever value. Then if AI is making it with our best values we have consistently, then theoretically it should improve civilization. And we could not only have good medicine, good health, good education, I mean, along the line, it may be fabulous. And the efficiencies may be extraordinary. Make things, very low cost eventually. And it would be, to me, one of the great risks is that we might not have these benefits. And I think to ensure that, that's why we got to have some rules of the road early on. Otherwise, we have to pray. Now, going back to Jeffrey Hinton, he makes the comment, which I subscribe to, that managing this may be impossible, but you have to try. And I say that's the only moral position. Because I was involved a little bit, you may know, with Herman Kahn and the Cold War and nuclear and all that sort of stuff. And the majority of people thought that nuclear war was inevitable. If I would maybe you too, go to an audience somewhere and say, how many think World War III is going to happen? Most of the hands go up back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Well, we got around it because some people said, we got to try. So I'm in the same position. This may be impossible, but we got to try. It's time for the world to wake up that this is a serious issue that we got to get the best minds working on as fast as we can. And many of them are.
Is there any attempt to regulate the actors, the people who have control of AIs, and who can maybe also contract it out to clients, some of whom may have nefarious intentions?
Yeah.
Is there any attempt to actually restrict the use of AI for criminal or semi-criminal purposes? Are there any test cases?
Yeah.
Has it happened?
Yeah. Well, because current law still applies. I mean, if you use AI to kill somebody, you're still a murderer. Just like you don't put the gun in jail, you put the human in jail, right? So those laws still apply. They just and they're being tested out. But more to your point, we did a study that actually will be in this book coming out, but it's also been on our website. We did a study on 22 questions on all this stuff, and given to 55 hotshots. And then based upon that pattern of responses, we came up with a bunch of regulations, and then Delphied and surveyed them around the world and got some feedback. So we have a large list of potential rules that could be done. Now, when I said, I'm glad you brought this up, because I'd like to make a distinction here. In the past, we had rules for technologies to manage human behavior. And we have to do this again. However, it has one other part. The AGI itself is an actor. So we have to have rules for humans' use, and we have to have rules for AGI itself. That's new. We've never done this before. This is why we got to have a conversation. We don't know. This is the unknown. It's like the early days of the Rand Corporation. How do you prevent World War III? We don't know.
And especially, I think it would be very difficult to know the difference between
Yeah.
It'd be easy to shift the blame onto the AI when in fact it's acting under
right.
instructions.
And vice versa. The AGI
Yeah.
can plan it on the human.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I want to delve a bit deeper into this regulatory question. And just as a little bit of background, in a recent article that was published in the Extra newsletter, and I should say, of course, that EXTRA stands for Existential Threats and Risks to All. And we are an initiative of the World Academy trying to provide an info hub and a forum to discuss existential risks, one of which we consider to be AI. That's just as a little bit of background. But in our newsletter, I published this article and I argued that it would be impossible to contain AI and other dual use technology in a climate of reckless geopolitical, military, and also economic competition. That is, unless we have a multilateral framework of regulations. In other words, one nation state going alone would massively disadvantage themselves. So such a framework would need to be enforceable so that those who obey the rules are not disadvantaged. And I'm guessing everyone here would like to know how far that process has come. And I cannot think of a better person to ask than you because of your role on the AGI, as chair of the AGI panel on the UN. And I wanted to ask you, how did you first become involved and what are you currently working towards in that context at that multilateral level, which I think is all important?
Right. There was a member of the Club of Rome who knew me for a long period of time since he's working in the UN system since 1988 and knew that I did future stuff. And so he was thinking about this stuff and said, "Well, what's your position?" And I said, "Well, I just so happen to be doing a study on it right now." And so he had me give a briefing to the Secretary General of the UN Council of Presidents of the General Assembly. And then that led to another meeting of the council, which I gave a briefing to again last year at this time, just before the UN meetings. And then they said, "Okay, that's cool. Can you can you give us some more background stuff?" Which I did. And then there was another meeting where they said, "Okay, can you put together a small panel and write us a report what the UN should do?" And then that has been done. And that report now is being circulated. It's a public document, and there's some pushback from people that say, "Well, wait a minute, we're having a hard enough time dealing with narrow AI. You know, give us a break. You know, we're not ready for this AGI stuff yet." And I'm saying, it doesn't matter whether you're ready; you're going to have to deal with it anyway. So it's bouncing around a little bit within the UN system. I just got off of a fascinating conversation with some hotshots in media that want to put together a 2 to 3 minute video to say something about like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Are you? This is an important matter for the world." A very simple sort of public service thing just to get a buzz going on. So we want so in the next couple of weeks there'll be meetings, side meetings in New York, which I'll participate in. One will be for this UN Council, which will have the current president, General Assembly, and then the incoming one as well there. And the agenda would be to put it on the agenda of the General Assembly to have a special session specifically on AGI, not just AI, because then they'll talk about the current stuff like all the other conferences that have been okay, but this is a different deal. Get it on there, and then simultaneously, there's other informally collaborating with other groups that are starting to work on the text for AGI licensing systems in countries, and also for a treaty system for the UN. So you have all these things going, and there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen simultaneously if we're ever going to make this. We can't do it like a linear one after another. We'll just never get there. So we are pushing also countries to put in their speech a simple paragraph or two saying the world needs a global conversation on this stuff. It's the most complex management problem we've ever had. This is going to require the whole world to get involved, and we would recommend that the president of the General Assembly hold a specific session on AGI, separate on that. So we're hoping to get that in different countries right now. There's about 16 countries we're in conversation with about this. Unfortunately, I've given up on the White House at the moment. We almost got Mr. Musk to collaborate with Trump on such a part in the speech. And there was even some text, and this is still in play a little bit, even though they've had an argument. But and the other is he will be around New York during that time, so there may be some press stuff to be worked. A lot of this stuff is in motion. It's just at the moment being put together.
So, Jerome, I guess once you sort of come together at that multinational level, I guess there's some laggards and some leaders in terms of legislation. You were just mentioning the US. Just how bad is it? Is there any control at all over, say, OpenAI? Is there any licensing, any restrictions on their activities at all? And how does it look in the best sort of jurisdictions? Maybe, I don't know, I think the EU is quite far ahead, relatively far ahead.
Well, the EU is far ahead, but not on AGI. It's far ahead on the current stuff.
Yeah.
As is China, by the way. Now, one of the things on this that I should also mention, as we want the UN to provide some international coordination on this, we also need nation states to do it. As you're pointing out, you got to have national rules. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency, it doesn't run the nuclear power plants. The countries do it, but they set the standards up here. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a thing called the Interparliamentary Union. I think that IPU.
Yeah. I know them. Yeah.
Good. So they've asked to partner with the Millennium Project to have a panel on the military stuff, because the Europeans are not talking about the military yet. The United States is not talking about the military yet. China's not talking about the military yet. But it's a big deal. So,
as I said earlier, I think it's what is really driving it. Ultimately, you have that pressure, if you want military supremacy, or for that matter, economic, you need to push it as hard as you can. And in that climate, how can you restrict it? It's a wild race.
Well, you got two avenues. We can have, just like during the Cold War, the control of the nuclear arms race was done secretly initially by the Soviet Union and the United States. They didn't rely on the UN to do that. So I think the same thing on this. It's China, U.S., quiet meetings, and I understand, according to the Financial Times, there's already been 2 of them. There may have been some more since then, I don't know about. But those should be done as a parallel activity altogether. And if China and the United States can come to an agreement, then they can open up the agreement to other countries to ratify and participate as well. But I think it's got to be U.S. and China to do it. Now, on the civilian side, that's got to be done by the national legislatures, parliaments, and all that sort of stuff. And so the parliamentary union people, I guess, since they want to do the military, the parliaments still have to authorize in some way military activity. I mean, they're not acting on their own, supposedly.
You could argue about that.
Yeah, we're both unfortunately laughing here. Anyway, but to jump back over to the original thrust of extra about the threat part, the threat here is that as people race to achieve it, and I would say mid rather than early, mid AGI stuff, then it's very likely that they will, as this phrase goes, cut corners on safety. You may know that OpenAI, several of their leaders left because they said it's not being done safely, and they started Anthropic. That's how Anthropic was formed, because they thought they were unhappy with how the safety was handled. And then subsequently, another leader left as well. So, and that's just the public stuff. We have no idea what the military's doing, right? So I'm hoping that parliaments will continue to push for a U.S.-China deal, and then adapt it to different countries as quickly as possible. Because as it stands right now, there's nothing standing in the way of the greatest concentration of power the world's ever known. And Putin was very clear. He said, whoever gets there will rule the world. And then a few years later, you may remember, China said, and we will in 2030.
Well, that sounds like an existential threat to me, because under those conditions, it's very hard to regulate. Very hard. There has to be a sobriety that reaches the key leaders of the major powers, and it's hard to see how that's going to happen. Not impossible, but I mean, we had the same, like you said, with the nuclear competition, and there was a sobriety that set in at a certain point. But the difference was that there we had Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We could actually see, and with AI, it's much harder to see the incidents, the accidents, the displays of what it could do if unleashed. And once we see it, it may be too late, like you said. So that's really quite tricky. Yeah.
Well, there's another dimension to it, and is that nuclear energy or nuclear power, nuclear technology, at the beginning, there wasn't no civil conception of how we could use it to actually improve the life of people. But artificial general intelligence or generative intelligence is already improving processes around, well, every business cycle known to man right now. That's why there's this whole complication about how job markets are going to adapt to the next technology boom, in which a lot of people is just going to become obsolete. So the fact that artificial intelligence is already technically improving the life of people makes it more difficult to actually warn others about the risks of uncontrolled AI.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, Lorenzo, that's absolutely true. And actually, my next question was going to be how do we keep up with the regulatory requirements? And one of the concerns I have is that it's got such a scale. We've just discussed the military issue, which is very worrying, but there are other things. AI, like Lorenzo said, it's affecting all aspects, all spheres of life. It interferes in many things, like from writing code to giving psychological counseling. That's been in the news recently. People using AI as a counseling service, with some risks, like suicide or incitement to violence. So it's got such a spectrum. It's not just one thing.
Right.
So do you have a kind of a map of the regulatory requirements? Is there some kind of mapping there happening?
Yeah, a little bit. But let me go back to your first part where you talk about the accident. One of the unknown leaders of one of the top firms, I'll go unnamed, in conversation with our report on the UN report thing, said, okay, but I have a hunch it's going to require an accident. It's going to have to be some disaster, because humans don't do it until you smack them. I mean, you pointed out you had a couple of bombs in Japan that sort of like woke up people. And so is there a similar thing with AGI that would wake up people? And I'm going like, I don't want to take that risk. I mean, that may be the answer, but I don't want to take that risk, because that accident, whatever it is, might develop its own momentum that we lose control right then and there. never get back to it. We can do some stuff, never get back to it. So this is
Hmm.
where we go into your other part of your question about, how do you keep up? And the answer is you don't. You forecast ahead of time and see what are the possibilities coming up. We've done some scenarios on all this sort of stuff. How do you forecast ahead of time? And then what are the intervention strategies? What do we got to do with that? Now, when you're talking about benchmarking, we haven't done benchmarking per se, but we have created 5 scenario drafts out to 2030. No, out to 2035. The reason for 2035 is because then I think you can talk plausibly about artificial superintelligence. So we want to get
Sorry, Glenn, when you say we, who exactly do you mean?
Sorry. All right. I run a think tank, as you mentioned, called the Millennium Project. And the Millennium Project has done doing 3 phases of studies on this. The first one I mentioned, which is we identified 22 questions, which, by the way, all by themselves are worthy to read. 22 questions. We thought that these were the 22 most important questions to ask. Again, to get ahead of the game. And then we sent these out to 55 of what you would consider to be the number one hotshots. All of them. I mean, Jeffrey and Sam and all the rest of these, Elon Musk, 55 of the hotshots, and saying, I don't expect you to answer all 22 questions, but at least pick out 4 or 5. So not everybody addressed every question, but enough addressed every question that it gives you a good overview. And that's, to my knowledge, the best overview, because we bring into this assessment many different voices, many different points of view. And then phase 2 was, all right, what do we do about it? How do you organize? How do you make a new kind of a UN system, a multi-stakeholder, part AI, hybrid AI, human thing that manages this thing? What are the different ways of doing this? And there's a bunch of different ways that are being considered, being done. And then what are the specific rules for users? What are the specific rules for developers? What are the specific rules for countries, as well as, and then the UN? So we broke them down. So there was, I don't know, 50 or more things. So it's a lot to summarize. But much of it, the focus is on the developers. And there are people that throw up their hands and say, wait a minute, you can't regulate the development of this thing? You'll slow down progress. And I'm saying, how long do you think it's going to take to get the rules agreed to and implemented? If you can do them in 3 years, that's fabulous. And so that means that there's no restrictions for 3 years. So we're not slowing down any innovation. At the fastest we can do this is maybe 2 to 3 years. So we're not going to be slowing down any innovation at all. So it's a bogus argument. Really gets me upset.
Yeah.
Now, what was the last part of your question? I'm not sure I got.
Yeah, well, how do you kind of map out the different areas? I mean, you need a lot of expertise just to get back, to use that example with the counseling, who can understand the impact of AI in psychological self-help, use of AI, if not psychologists. And they have been ringing the alarm bells about abuse of AI in that context, because they understand that context. And that's just an example. It's like that in any kind of medical field, in any field.
Well, the way
there are risks of AI also making mistakes, simply mistakes, unintentional, and that you need the experts across all those fields to somehow give their sort of feedback. And it to me, it seems like it calls for quite a massive mapping exercise.
Yeah. Well, we've got some of it. We don't. All is a big word. We're not to all. We're at the part. What we've got so far. So that's the phase. So phase 3 is 5 alternative scenarios out to 2035, and the people writing the scenarios are drawing on phase 1 and phase 2, and anybody else they want to, and any AGI they want to do, but 5 different scenarios, so people can see there's different ways this can evolve, and each scenario is over 10 pages. So these are detailed, and now we're having a peer review. This is where your point about different views. We're having a peer review now going out, and if you're interested, by the way, Thomas, I can send them to you if you'd like.
Sure.
Because they're open
Sure.
for peer review by everybody, and then they get rewritten, and then in this book coming out, or the hardback comes out in a couple of weeks. But then I'll also do a paperback in 6 months later. The paperback will have these scenarios in there, and the Millennium Project will also make them available through different means and so forth. And the purpose is to open up the awareness to say, look, this can happen in a lot of different ways. There's not just one clear thing. And the idea of the large language model, throwing stuff in, that's only one assumption. That's not the only way to get there. There's other possibilities. And the example I love to give is Alan Turing. Remember Alan Turing? He outthought a whole committee of hotshot mathematicians. So sometimes one person with a better idea can outthink an army. And so that goes to like doing the algorithms better. Anyway, there's a decentralized approach. As a matter of fact, one of the writers of the scenarios is a guy named Ben Goertzel. He popularized the word artificial general intelligence, which is a lousy. Artificial general. It should be general, but anyway. He popularized it. He wrote the book. He's one of the leaders, but he's into the decentralized approach because his attitude is you can't stop the centralization of power on this thing unless you decentralize it. And there's not just one way to decentralize. There's a variety of ways to centralize as well. And he is, I would say, as much the leader on that as anybody else. So he explains that in his scenario how that can evolve. Of course, the trouble with the decentralized approach, what nobody's in charge means nobody's in charge.
Well, I was going to say you need some very good generalists who have the overview, and then a network of specialists. Yeah, but that takes resources, and I'm going to that leads me to my next question, and it's about obstacles and resources when it comes to regulation. The regulation process. So they are asked who's actually lobbying against regulation, and conversely, who's funding it and supporting it. Who are the players there? I mean, who wants to slow it down? Who wants to accelerate it? Who's willing to pay for it? Because it's a serious effort that's required there.
Well, you can do a Google search. I think it was announced a week or two ago that a new political action committee has been formed to lobby against any regulation. You may have seen that. And a bunch of money is going to go into that.
Whose money is it, Jerome?
Do we know? I would rather not say, but I'll let your imagination run wild, and you get an idea.
Let's say most likely it would be people who intend to profit from AI. Yeah.
Right.
Like that.
Okay. See, I fly in and out of Silicon Valley, and I want to get in and out in one piece.
Okay. Well, so we have, the equivalent of, say, the fossil fuel lobby. We have the AI lobby. Let's just say something like that.
That's right.
Well, that's kind of sad, because at one stage we had warnings coming out from the industry itself. There's certainly some individuals.
And they still do. And they're two-faced. Out in public, they're saying regulated. I mean, everybody said regulated. You can get Sam Altman, you can get Demis, you can get every single one of them saying regulated. They'll international. They're all on the record. They're all there. But then under the table, they're probably contributing.
Well, they are conflicted. I mean, that's not really surprising. That they would be conflicted. That like everyone else, they think on different levels. People have their ideals, and then they think about their hip pocket.
Right.
Right.
These ambivalences are part of the story.
At the same time, those relevant actors or stakeholders say regulate, but they are not being specific about what they want to regulate. Maybe they want to regulate in a specific part of the market that is what their competition is developing. So that will later on help them to, stay ahead. So at the end of the day, it's just a power move. How real they are, how sincere they are with their motives is something that we will never know.
Well, here's a thought. You guys might want to do it. I might want to do it. But you may remember there have been several Senate hearings on regulating AI. And the last one was in camera. And it had, even Elon Musk was there. But it was an in-camera meeting. And when Elon Musk came out, the press, came up to him and said, "All right, what'd you do? What'd you do?" He said, "This is very useful, and could be a historic meeting." Now, Elon Musk, I must say, has been one of the loudest and longest voices on regulation on AGI around. It's over 10 years. And he has said very clearly, I don't want regulations and a lot of other stuff, but this is different. This is different. We don't let somebody go to a grocery store and buy an atomic bomb. We just don't do that. And AGI is more dangerous than atomic bombs. And he said that several times. Now, if there's a way to get the transcript of that hearing in camera public, that might be very interesting, because the whole purpose of that meeting, if I understood, what laws would be enacted. And I can understand some of these heads of companies don't want to be on the records advocating A or B. So that meeting, if we can get a hold of that transcript, that would be where it's a lot of rubber would be hitting the road, I would suspect.
But on the positive side, Jerome, who's getting behind the regulation? Who is willing to spend some money on it? Because you can't have a bunch of volunteers doing this. You need people working on this full time. Many people to do it properly. So who's actually spending money on it? Private or public?
There is a billionaire in Estonia, Jan Tallinn. He was, I think, one of the early people on what was the one before Zoom? Anyway, some of the early softwares he made a lot of money on, doing quite well. He has put money into the existential threat place in Cambridge, probably in touch with. He also put the money and co-founded another one called the Future of Life Institute, headed by a guy named Max Tegmark in Princeton at MIT. And they actually have lobbyists working on all this sort of stuff a bit. And one of them has joined our informal team of coordination on this, because we're doing some of these meetings as well. So the Future of Life is a player. Another one is the Future Society. They started at Harvard. It was originally called the Harvard Future Society, but then they dropped the word Harvard. First time I ever heard Harvard drop. But anyway, they are also holding meetings and have held some meetings between the United States and China, by the way, if I remember. So they're swinging as well. There's another one called Control AI. I think they're originally out of the UK, and they have now a full-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C., dealing just with Congress and the White House. Office of Science, Technology, Policy. OSTP is part of the White House. Anyway, and there's some other ones that are less direct, but I would say those are as much the point of the sword as I'm aware of. And this UN Council, their player on this is certainly as strategically as the Future of Life Institute. So we actually have a meeting. We had one this morning, several hours ago, where we collaborate. What you got done here? What'd you do there? And so there's this informal stuff. What countries have been contacted about what? So it's a common ground. But in the sense of a political action committee, no.
I'm just also thinking, who's got responsibilities? I mean, it's not so easy to kind of pinpoint in the case of AI, which ministry, say, in a government, in a national government, would take primary responsibility. Is it different in different countries, different ministries?
Well, it's different. Yeah.
How does it usually pan out?
Well, you have like the responsibility in the United States is Office of Science and Technology Policy. However, one of the I don't know how much I can get into detail on this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I'm
But
sorry, I'm a terrible interviewer. I've had many years of dealing with people in situations like that, and so you have to.
yeah,
Yeah, I respect your
yeah,
lines of
we're in touch with, as are some of these other organizations, in touch with such people in different countries. They have a copy of our report, and we follow up as best we can to get them to put it in the speech, the UN General Assembly. But in the sense which you mean it, there's no, I mean, there's a guy named Connor Leahy on a safety thing. There's a guy named Eliezer Podolsky, who used to be with the machine intelligence thing. There's a bunch of different players that are quite good, quite serious, and are hacking away the best they can. And we all sort of informally, not all, but many of us sort of collaborate a bit. But this interview has gotten me to think, I wonder if we should get a political action committee going. I don't know.
Yes, I think that there needs to be some kind of thought put into the, allocating responsibility at the government level. Yeah.
So that has been done. But what they've done is that they've focused on current AI to a large degree. And there are, I mean, in some countries they call it the Office of Digitalization of the President. In another place they'll call it the Minister of Science, or Minister of AI. Like several countries have ministers of AI. Spain's got one. United Arab Emirates got one. There's a bunch of these things around. So, but out of these cast of characters, we're in touch with almost all of them. I mean, as much as possible. And it'll be interesting to see if we can break a little logjam. Because if in a couple of weeks, if my guess, I'm going to be in trouble here, so I'm going to be on the record, and you'll come back to this interview and say, "God damn it, you were wrong." I figure if at least 5 countries at the General Assembly say we need a specific General Assembly session specifically on AGI, I suspect if we get at least 5 of them to say that, that will give the confidence to the President of the General Assembly to say, okay, in 4 months on the 15th, we'll do it. Because then once you have that target out there, then we can go to work on the countries and say, what's your positions? But until that target gets out, agreement, there's no point. So we're focusing on getting that agreement first. Then once that agreement, then everybody can go to work on countries real fast.
I guess it will also matter which countries they are, because what I'm seeing here is that while everybody dibble dabbles in AI to some extent, we're going to have major powers and minor players, just like we have nuclear armed nations, and it's going to be in AI too. Top level AI will be a relatively small club. We'll have the AI club, just like we have the nuclear club. So it'll be those players, and they'll also be, we had just the initiative in the UN to kind of outlaw nuclear weapons from the non-nuclear nations. Right. It doesn't get much traction with the nuclear club, and I think I'm sort of a little worried that this could be replicated in the domain of AI.
Yep. No, I agree. That's something to be dealt with. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things, there's 2 proposals to have, one of them specifically by Eliezer Podolsky. He had worked on the problem of aligning how do you put values physically into the chips in the software. Not talk about it, but do it for real. He worked on it for 10 years, threw up his hands and said, we're all going to die. I've given up. However, he continues swinging, so he hasn't really given up. Now, he's made a proposal that we assessed, along with 5 other models, that you would have the UN could set up regional banks, massive ones, and that they would have a treaty. And the parties to the treaty for each of the regional would have access. So this is how little Dominica or little Malawi can have access. They can maybe only put in 3 cents, but they get 3 cents, play in the game, so to speak. So they can actually make money in the process of it. And another proposal, I've forgotten who it was, is one or two, maybe one in China, one in the United States, or whatever. Another massive one, but then it would be run by private companies, and then they would. The trouble is, you get rid of a lot of startups this way. But massive thing. At this, by the way, part of this idea, as I was told, was first floated under Biden's administration. Was the idea you can't control too many startups, too many things all over the place. So maybe if you can just have it like one or two places, and you control that, and then put everybody in, push them into that. We'll see. But anyway, the idea is that those are two different, obviously, approaches to it. And I don't know how that's going to go. There's just an awful lot to say about these things in trouble. I mean, there's so many ways to handle this. It's not that we don't have ideas. What are the ideas that are going to work and be implemented? And that's politics. Yeah. And that's why we're back to the UN. That's politics.
Yeah, and I'd like to mention also a recent report that's come out that's entitled Governance of the Transition to Artificial General Intelligence, Urgent Considerations for the UN General Assembly. Now, that was produced for the Council of Presidents of the United Nations General Assembly and came out in March. And it addresses the imminent arrival of AGI and the opportunities and risks that it represents. And as you said, we mustn't forget also the positives. AGI could deliver really transformative benefits across science, medicine, sustainable development. And it also poses existential threats if left uncontrolled. So the authors of that report recommend a special UN General Assembly session, and you've mentioned that as something you're working towards, and also a high-level expert panel and mechanisms such as a global AGI observatory, a certification system. So these are some of the tools that are being proposed there, and a dedicated treaty or agency. There's some support. I've heard President Xi has supported some kind of agreement. But what is the timeline on this? Or how close are these steps? I mean, how close are we to that?
Well, we could hopefully. One of the first steps is we'll do a briefing at the UN as informal, sort of to like market test a bit this stuff, where we bring in the various members of this panel from the report you just mentioned, and it will be a briefing on the report, and then that theoretically, if that goes well, then that helps the president say, okay, I see the people are interested in this, so we'll have a session. Now, but to be done in parallel is, as I mentioned, there's groups working on the treaty already, because if they have a General Assembly on this and it says, okay, we want to have a committee of the willing to get together to text, bingo, they've already got a first draft right off the bat. It's being worked on. If somebody says, okay, there's got to be national sort of something up, bingo, we got some stuff. So a lot of these things are being worked on now, but they would get implemented obviously one after the other. But we have to get them, because we can't spend a year or two drafting a treaty, which is the normal approach. We don't have the time to do that, so we got to work on it now, in hopes that eventually we get authorized, and then we can give some drafts.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So my own view, and it's just my own view, is that we should think in terms of a 3-year deadline. Because if intermediate AGI is achieved before the decade, and that simply means before the decade, which doesn't mean it's necessarily by 2030, it could be 2029, 2028, maybe 2027 for that matter. It would be very smart if we have the regulations in place before it goes out on the internet. because once it gets free on the internet, good luck. So I think it's useful to think in terms of 3-year deadlines. So when I'm dealing with the people, they start to say something that is not going to make it in 3 years, and say it'll be irrelevant. And yeah, you can do all that, but it won't matter.
Hmm.
We have to stick to just those things that matter between here and 3 years.
Well, I can only say I hope you and your collaborators will succeed to open minds and make people aware of what is at stake. And I was going to ask you to just very briefly engage in a little bit of foresight and imagine it's the year 2040, and where do you think the world will be then? I want to go back to the report, because on page 3 and 4 it talks about some of the issues, like irreversible consequences, the possibility of new or enhanced weapons of mass destruction, and particularly AI nuclear combination, critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, extreme power concentration, inequality. And you talk about loss of future benefits, and finally existential risks. Where do you think we'll be in 2040, Jerome? I know it's speculative, but
right, yeah. Well, as your friendly neighborhood futurist, we like to talk about possibilities, but not to dodge your question, because I actually am on the record 30 years ago in a book called Future Mind on artificial intelligence, believe it or not. And in there, I said, if you can't beat them, join them. So my preference would be to have that we start to integrate ourselves in the same way that I'm integrated with my glasses. All right, I put my glasses on, I can see a little better. And there are various approaches to this, but I would see by 2040, to use your term there, that we are in synergetic relations with artificial superintelligence that is beyond our understanding. But it's not necessarily damaging to us, because we've evolved together. Just like we don't understand all of nature, we are 100% dependent upon nature. There's not a thing we can do without nature, but we don't understand everything about nature. But we get along and survive and build cities and so forth, and pollute the environment. But so that would be my view: is that the civilization becomes conscious technology, in the sense of consciousness and technology becomes a continuum, in the same way that we are in a continuum right now. Now, clearly, I'm talking to a machine that talks to a machine that talks to a machine that talks to some bones in your ear that rattles into the nerve system, gets to your run, and somehow consciousness jumps up, right? So we already have that idea of a continuum between consciousness and technology in a primitive way right now here. But imagine that being that instead of just the three of us, that we'd have access to all of the people that want us to have access to them, as well as all of the things of the world, as well as all of the ideas and knowledge of the world. And then we evolve together into a self-actualization economy, so that we start to develop our own self, and we go hit markets around the world for what we want to do and be. Because in a large market, you don't need more than 0.0000000 of the market. You can still make a living. So that I would see a civilization evolving into a conscious technology, so to speak.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's also I recently had a conversation with ChatGPT on really on philosophy, and I was talking with it about the ontological status of AI as compared to humans, who are also in a way, have a code, a genetic code, neural code, and so on. And the whole idea of that nature is in a way form, information. It's all about information. And in the end, ChatGPT said, "Well, you are really taking me down the rabbit hole." Yeah, but there as well. But I can sense there that interrelationship, and like you said before, with the adolescents, I guess you want to have a good relationship, and it's a two-way. It's no longer one way, it's two way. And we also then have to think about how do we respect a sentient being that is based on code, a different kind of code.
There's
What
actually
rights should they have? And how can we expect AI to treat us better than we treat it?
there's actually a constitution, draft
Hmm.
constitution. You can do a Google search on draft constitution for artificial general intelligence. And I forgot her name, but if you put down Germany, it'll probably show up. She's from Germany, and several of us have helped her think it through. But there is actually a working document to address exactly what you're talking about. What ought to be the
Yeah.
rules of the road between the two of us, as we have the Constitution between the citizens and the government. We have rules
Hmm.
for that, and so the idea is to do the same thing between humanity and future AGI is being worked on.
So that's the sort of utopian end. And I must say, I'm a little bit hopeful there that a super intelligence would be, less hostile than we tend to be, we humans. But there is also the dystopian side, and would you think that it is an existential threat somewhere,
Yes,
potentially? Yeah.
absolutely.
Which
As a matter of
brings
fact,
us back to.
I'd go so far to say, if we don't figure out how to manage this, then that is more inevitable. As a matter of fact, you got Jeffrey Hinton saying you got a 50-50 chance right now. So yeah, I
Okay,
guess
so
the essential threat is the business as usual scenario.
What
at
is fascinating is that Hollywood and in general cinema has been exploring these technological dystopias and also literature. And although we have read books about how the world went to hell because we were, I don't know, too proud to realize that our hubris was consuming what it was left of our humanity, and we have all these movies, we have Terminator, we have, so on and so forth. We are just still too stubborn to realize that we are closer to those type of scenarios than what we want to believe.
Right.
I mean, there are
Yeah.
references in pop culture about what will happen if we don't pay attention to the idea of regulating something that will eventually become smarter than us. So far, we have been having the upper hand because we were the smartest being in Earth. That's about to change.
Mm-hmm. So, as I said,
That's
if you can't beat them, join them.
But pretty much, we will have to to develop a symbiotic type of relationship with them.
Yes, it's very interesting to think about fiction and how it can really anticipate far distant futures, like Stanley Kubrick's 2001.
Right.
The famous scene where the computer has even though it has some values written into its code, decides that it to save the mission, it has to kill the human participants. Yeah, so that was a long time ago. That was 50 years ago, roughly. I don't know exactly when it came out, but a long time ago.
1968, I think.
68, yeah. Okay,
somewhere
wow.
around there, 67, 68. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the extra working group in our InfoHub, we really try to cover a whole range of existential threats. And one thing I wanted to, it's almost coming to the end, but one thing I wanted to ask you is, how do you see AI relating to other existential risks?
Yeah.
Because they could compound each other. AI could also help us, say, revolutionize our energy systems and so on.
Right. Yeah.
Where do you see that? Where do you see AI acting as a risk multiplier or a risk mitigator, or both?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about the risk multiplier, but for example, just a little bit on the multiplier part. There is we have seen how a range of weapon systems. We've seen that the drone became a fancy deal all of a sudden, so to speak. A tactical thing out of Somalia and other innovations around the world. Well, AGI could come up with stuff we've never even dreamed of. That could be existential threats in war stuff. Secondly, cyber crimes. It could come up with new crimes we never even imagined. I mean, 50 years ago, the idea of ransomware would have made no sense to anybody. And how much money does organized crime make on ransomware a year? Look it up. It's amazing. The cyber crimes make more money than all the military budgets combined. And the business loss, is two numbers. One number is what they make. There's another number, which is how much business loss, a business has lost as a result of this. That number is even bigger. And that's almost twice the military budgets of the world. So, and that's with just a bunch of guys knocking out code. What happens if AGI is knocking out its own code on crime?
That's right. I mean, most companies already have insurance against cyber crime, and this AI. I guess those policies will become more expensive.
Yeah. So invest in insurance companies. Good luck. Yeah, but they got to pay out on this stuff. So don't invest in. Never mind. Now, on the other part, we have one example is that you have a demographic problem financially worldwide where we have aging societies and they live long and they have medical benefits and health benefits and you look at the demographics and you say, that's not sustainable, folks. That's not going to last forever. However, if AGI comes up with better ways to improve our telomeres, for example, the aging mechanism within a cell, if it teaches, the disease problems, people still die of diseases, right? So if we create healthy living much longer than the past, then these people can make a living doing what I was talked about before, connecting to markets worldwide and so forth, and making some income, and then paying taxes. So instead of being a tax liability, which they are right now, they could become a tax asset. As a matter of fact, I would say this is going to be important to do this longevity stuff, because otherwise, I don't know how the financial system survives. You got to have it's not going to. So you want to have, like me, I'm way beyond the retirement age. I'm still active. I'm still paying taxes, right? So the more people that AI can move that in that direction, then that could make the financial system, save the financial system alone. I'm sure you've already heard all this sort of stuff about climate change. It's not enough to have the right answer. You got to have the right answer to the right place at the right time with the right resources. There's all sorts of supply chain stuff that's got to be addressed in climate change management. Well, AGI can do that, easily. So, yeah, there's tremendous benefits to this.
There's actually, I think, a deep irony between climate change and AI in terms of the time scales involved. On the one hand, you have AI, which is going through this absolutely exponential unfolding, and the challenge is to keep up with it. On the other hand, you have climate change, which is so slow that we can easily ignore it.
Yeah.
And by the time it becomes a really very serious threat or a manifest risk, rather, by that time, it's too late to do anything about it because it's set in for the next so many thousand years. So we're challenged there in two rather different ways. In our temporality, in our sense of what's relevant to us now.
Yeah, one of the things that I hope that in the existential group dealing with or risk group dealing with climate change, they take a look at the book called Under a Green Sky. Maybe you're familiar with that. Good. All right.
Yes.
You know all that. So imagine AI saying, okay, we want you to figure out how to handle these little microorganisms that are knocking out this poison gas, or how do we convert the poison gas into something else? I mean, if it can draw on all the molecular knowledge of the world, maybe it can figure out what to do. If we get to that point where and we probably, the conveyor belts are slowing down, as you know already.
Okay. Finally, my final question is really I want to focus a little bit on young people. We have Lorenzo Rodriguez with us. He's already chipped in a bit, and he's our newsletter editor and also junior fellow of VAS. And I wanted to ask Lorenzo, what is your perspective, for us, representing the younger generation? What's your perspective on AI? And do you have any particular question for Jerome? And I mean, myself, as a parent of a 17-year-old who's about to make, career choices, it's very difficult to see how young people can prepare themselves for a world that's in such flux due to AI. Lorenzo, do you have any particular?
Yep. In fact, I have three, but I'll try to be
Okay.
as brief as possible. The first one is actually connected with what you were saying right now, but also from the perspective of what will happen with the population that is not digital native. So we have this issue that will become more and more problematic with the years, and it's the fact that we might experience artificial intelligence illiteracy, just like there was this idea of computer illiteracy. Oh, wait. uh, this idea of computer illiteracy, in which people didn't know how to use a computer, and that was, blocking them from accessing other different type of job positions and upscaling in the job market. So there's the possibility that newest generations will have not that problem, but mainly my generation, we are still trying to catch up with all the different changes. And, these other ones that are already working, that it might be 40, 50, 35, they also have to catch up. So how we can do that upskilling to make sure that everyone stays relevant and nobody becomes obsolete, because the job market has a very extensive demographic. That would be the first one. And then, well, I can go with the second one that is actually a bit more political, less economic.
All right, I've just put in the chat a web link to a large study that we did on these questions. The first one was we reviewed everything we could get our hands on about this in the written large, the whole. We call it work technology because the whole interplay, the whole thing, and out to 2050 because you can't, because almost all the studies we reviewed only went one country, either went one country or just 5 years or one industry, but it didn't look at the whole thing. And so we did that, and then we ended up with I think 3 scenarios, maybe 5, but at least 3 scenarios, detailed ones, again 10 pages each. And then those were given to our nodes. Millennium Project has 70 nodes, so these groups of individuals and institutions around the world. And they had national workshops, and they would give these scenarios to the people to read. And it was a mix of people. I mean, artists, politicians, technocrats, religious, etc. Mix. And then after they read the scenario, they're supposed to throw them out and then say, okay, what does this mean for our country? What should we do? So they had a bunch of it, and there was like hundreds of such suggestions out of all these workshops. So we narrowed them down. Some were similar, of course, down to about over 90 actions, separate, distinct actions. So we divided those into what are the actions for government, what are the actions for science and technology organizations, what are the actions for I get excited about this. What are the actions for art and media? What are the actions for business and labor and so forth? So then we couldn't send out 90 strategies to have people assess. They would shoot me. There's too many. So we divide them into those categories, and we send out this to the business community to assess those actions, this to governments to assess the government act, and so forth. So we pull all this, and they not only rate them, but they also put in subjective comments, like if you do this, you got to remember this, or this will not work because of that. So we pull all that sort of stuff together into this report, and it is the most extensive report I know of. I mean, 90 actions. So when people say, well, we're going to improve STEM education, yeah, that's one of 90 actions. We got to do a lot more than STEM education, because in 2050, how many people are going to make a living out of this anyway? right? Everybody's going to make a living out of STEM work? I don't think so.
Hmm.
So you got to do a lot more than just that. So anyway, I
The,
recommend that you take a look at that.
Thank you. The second one, it's a bit more political, and it's about fake news. This term has been around for around a decade, give or take. And the reality is that disinformation and misinformation is not a new phenomenon. However, the reality is that now with artificial intelligence, it's getting more and more difficult to realize what is wrong or fake and what is actually the truth. So, as you mentioned before, governments are already instrumentalizing this, and they are already abusing of that possibility to do their own or advance their own agenda. Should we fight fire with fire, like try to develop an artificial intelligence software that could detect when something is a fake news, or how we can, create certain barriers for that? Because what I'm observing is that this entire dynamic is increasing the polarization in societies, and that is affecting the health of our political systems. The youth are the main target for that. Politicians are trying to polarize narrative because it's easier to get cheap votes like that. So, how we can put the brakes to it?
One right off of that is to change policy. The current policy is to identify and take down. That's like treading water. You're not drowning, but sooner or later you will, because when you identify something, it's already out of the barn. It's already been duplicated all over the place. I mean, how many people have seen it before it's identified? Even if only a handful of people have seen it, they then copy stuff and it goes viral like crazy. As you know, this research shows that fake news goes faster than the truth around the world. Right.
Yeah,
So
I live
I
in
would change the
Venezuela.
policy.
Fake news are everywhere.
Right. Okay. So I would change the policy from identification and takedown. You can still do that, but what I would rather do is to say, use AI here. You create a there's a lot of databases, by the way, of the fake. I get into the information warfare, frankly. I There's information warfare databases, and so there's a lot of examples of who, when, where it exists. So, and there's different. Princeton's got one, and I'm sure that NRO's got some, and so forth. So if we can put a software on top of the databases and then use it for predictive analytics in the same way that we were doing with generative AIs. A lot of the work's been done. It's just putting it together. So then the idea is to say, okay, what are likely disinformations in the next hour, the next week, the next month, and have it as a rolling forecast of all the potential stuff. Now, that can be done. The next part is hard to get going. Once it gets going, it's okay. But the first getting it going hard. Let's say, so you imagine these dots of all kinds of different nonsense that could happen over the next week or 2 weeks or whatever. And then and this becomes a database as well. So you click on the database, and what is the action that could be taken so that this does not have an impact or is prevented? Right? Now, it's not clear who has to do that answer. Initially, it might have to be the intelligence community. I don't know. Maybe there can be some public collaboration. But anyway, that's one of the weak points in the system. Then once you have that, then the next part gets a bit easier. You have Facebook save face, because it was used for all this sort of stuff. So now they can play the reverse role because they make their money on advertising. So they know they got the personality profiles, they got all that sort of stuff. So if this action requires somebody in St. Louis who is an anthropologist who happens to have somebody in the news, whatever bizarre characteristics, just like with advertising. So up would come a prompt if you've ahead of time said I'm happy to prevent disinformation stuff. Let me know when. So a little pop up can come up and says, next week there's going to be such and such in St. Louis, and we would like you to consider doing A, B, and C. And you say yes or no. If you say no, fine. You say yes, then you're an actor. The idea here is to distribute the workload, because we distributed the workload on viruses. We don't ask the government to protect our computer from viruses. We say that's a response of the individual. So since the individual is a target on this stuff, then the individual has got to be involved in it as well. And the way the individual can be involved in it as well is to reverse the effect of Facebook.
So the logic
turn
behind
it
it.
into a machine to like anticipate. And then listen to Holmes. Then once you start this cycling going, then what works gets reinforced. What doesn't work doesn't get reinforced. So the system gets smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter, beating the information warfare stuff.
So the logic behind it will be to treat fake news and disinformation just like a computer virus in a certain way.
Well, in the sense that, well, the analogy with a computer virus is that we say that the individual has a responsibility.
Exactly. The responsibility coming from the individual will be that.
Yeah. Facebook and the intelligence community and databases and places like Princeton University and others, they have the responsibility to make this system, get the system up and operational.
Yeah.
And then that's the hard part. But I'm convinced that once it gets going, then it learns like any other intelligence system, any other AI system. So there you're using AI to defeat the bad AI.
Okay.
So at the end, it's fire with fire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lorenzo, did you have another?
Yeah, and I believe that the last one is
need
it's
to come
very
to
short.
a close, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. This one came up during the interview, actually. I didn't have it previously. And it's that it was said that blockchain was going to change the world. And in a certain way, it did, because it created new financial dynamics and also created certain externalities, especially regarding organized crime and how to access funds and so on. So the question will be, how clearly does artificial intelligence differ from blockchain in its moment? Because apparently when the blockchain boom happened, it was going to revolutionize the whole world, but it didn't happen that way. So is it possible that maybe we are overestimating the impact that artificial intelligence will have, and it turns out that it's going to end up being halfway?
Yeah, I would draw an analogy with the internet. I was involved in what was called packet switching. It's the reason that the internet is cheap. You know about packet switching? Anyway, you take the data and you make a package and you switch it to a satellite. Now, so you can be on your computer all day long, but the actual satellite time might only be a second or two. That's why it's so cheap. So I was involved in getting it into third world countries informally. And so I would see the spread. I mean, I was in the jet planes that answered the question, how's it spreading? And it spread obviously irregular until it eventually got the whole world. So yes, the applications of one of my rules of thumb is that the breakthrough happens faster than people expect, but the application takes longer than is reasonable, because we knew about the internet stuff in the late 60s, early 70s. It wasn't until the 90s that it took. I mean, it was ridiculous that it took that long, but it did. So I would suspect that you may also have some time lags with this. The difference, though, with this is that when we did the packet switching, I had to get in a jet plane. You don't have to get in a jet plane with this. You just hit the return key.
Right.
So the spreading will be irregular, yes, but it'll be faster than the internet was. Oh, and by the way, one last thing, just to make it feel better. When we were doing this stuff with the internet, there was almost no conversations about. I mean, we did about the information warfare stuff that we were aware of, but all the rest of the stuff, creating silos and making people narrow-minded, and a lot of us we did not anticipate. And there was always no. You go back, you won't see much technological assessment going on and impact assessments going on about the internet in the early days, in the 70s, I guess, 70s and 80s. This would have been the time to do it. There wasn't much there. However, with AI, there's tons of technological assessments going. Like, that's what we're doing right now, right? We didn't have this kind of conversation in the 70s about the internet. We just didn't have them. So humanity's growing up maybe a little bit. We're getting a little more serious about, hey, we are a human family. These are some problems coming up. We got to take them seriously. And you have got, God knows, I mean, I'm trying to keep up with this stuff all the time. And it's a tremendous amount of stuff going on. So, I mean, the assessment stuff, tremendous amount of stuff going on. We didn't have any internet values in UNESCO or OECD. It didn't exist. So be of good cheer. Humanity may be getting more adult-like.
Yes, and maybe a little faster too. And especially, developing a discourse on a matter such as AI at a global level and connections, networks. And that's what we really are all about, networking and bringing people together who work on these issues, and also exploring the synergies, the interactions between the different challenges that humanity faces. But Jerome, thank you very much. It's absolutely amazing insight, and thank you for sharing your very much personal knowledge of what's happening on the regulatory front in particular. And I wanted to share my screen briefly and show your book. Hold
yeah,
on.
thank you. Yeah, I would tell your readers really quickly, this is an expensive book. I didn't price it. It's the publisher. So get your library to buy it. Get your university library to buy it, and then take it out and read it.
Okay. So can you just say a few words about what it covers?
Yeah.
What topics? Or?
It has an executive summary, which is not too bad. So if you read that alone, that's good. Then it has several parts. It has the 22 questions. I added something on the book here. I had to make it readable. Okay. So I distilled these views of the 55 hotshots on the 22 questions. But I also asked AI the same questions. So you can see throughout the whole thing, this is what the hotshot human said, this is what the hotshot AI said. The same questions, all the way through. And so that's one section. Then did the same sort of a thing with the regulations. What did the AI say? I mean, what did the humans say? What did the AI say? So it's like going back and forth throughout the thing. Then they said they weren't ready for these 5 scenarios I talked about. So they said that I had done one before in this work technology book called The Self-Actualization Economy, If Humans Were Free. And so they said, well, can we publish that one? I said, sure. So there's one scenario that will make you feel good if you get too depressed about the other stuff. And then I had a section, if I remember correctly, on stuff that's still hanging. What are the hanging chads, so to speak, of this deal, and what was still got to be resolved to make it work, and then some conclusions. It has been said by a couple of people in this morning session, it's the best overview you can get on the issue. Because otherwise, that's like Ben Goertzel, it's Ben's view. Or, and what I'm saying, here's a variety of views.
Well, Jerome, you left me with thinking rather a little bit more hopefully that, it's also about human evolution. It's not just AI evolution. It's a kind of a co-evolution, and our lives, the lives of our children, grandchildren will be so different. I guess there's some hope in that also, that we will change and maybe rise to the challenge of being more responsible in our custodianship of the planet and of our technologies. So on that note, thank you very much. It's been an amazing interview, and I've learned a lot, and I wish you the best of luck with your efforts, and I hope you stay fit for a long time to come. We need you. Okay, thank you very much.
Wes, the Academy, endorsed the report, by the way. We haven't done anything about that endorsement yet, but we want to think about what do we do with that endorsement. I don't know. But anyway.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Jerome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.